The 60s, Silicon Valley, California, American West Coast. Time of revolution that changed everything. A time when hippies, freaks, and hobbyists dreamed of having their own computer. Until then, only corporations, some universities, and the government had expensive, large computers. A small computer for everyone? Impossible. Inconceivable. Unheard of.
I would say the West Coast Revolution is the revolution of the second half of the 20th century. It's the revolution that has swept the world more than communism or any national movement. There isn't a single facet of human life that hasn't been touched and isn't being transformed right now by the revolution of small computers.
The pioneers of the personal computer believed in a better world. The power of mainframe computers could be snatched from the monopoly.
We were all leftists. I mean, there's no such thing as a Republican computer programmer from the 70s. It simply didn't happen. I mean, everybody was anti-war, anti-Nixon, and using personal computers to take power was the eventuality that came out of the left. And people really did walk around in sandals and eat brown rice and take LSD. If that's not a leftist position, I don't know what is.
Silicon Valley is a magical place. People ask me all the time, why is it so? I think it started because there were so few natives here. There wasn't a deep history. California has always been a place that has attracted adventurers and gold seekers, and it has a history of that. It has a history of being an integration place.
I think there's a spirit in the Valley that encourages innovation. There's a lot of people willing to take a risk for the possibility of a reward. And the reward could either be financial, or the reward could be that a lot of people are using what you did.
The origin of Silicon Valley goes back to 1848 when they discovered gold in the gold country. And there was such a rush, an authentic gold rush. And they came and did something totally extraordinary. They dug money out of the ground. And it changed everything. It brought a capital to California as had never been done. And that led to rushes of all kinds here. We had the railroads, we had real estate, shipbuilding, Hollywood. It goes on. And then in 1900, we invented the electronic age here, when Lee DeForest came up with the vacuum tube.
So Americans came as far west as they could get. They couldn't go any farther, but they looked out onto this beautiful blue ocean, and they were kind of separate from the East Coast, so they had permission to do things. So the earliest computer pioneers in the 50s were very innovative out here. There was almost nothing going on, so they learned how to share resources.
When you come across the United States from New York to the West Coast, you shed rules. You come here out to the California, and there's nothing but the great blue edge of the Pacific Ocean, nothing to stop you. So geographically, it's free. If, you know, and all these kids were hitchhiking up and down Highway 1, which is nothing but ocean and a little bit of land. And Beach Boys, you know. We'll have fun, fun, fun.
People like Steve Jobs would never have survived on the East Coast because they had basically zero weirdness tolerance. And California has a lot more weirdness tolerance, which proved to be to its advantage in this situation.
I landed in California and went up to Berkeley and met some people, met one gal that ended up taking me to a nudist camp down in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which was my first experience with group nudity. This is really cool.
The people that came to California weren't the people who were perfectly content to stay where they were back on the East Coast. California was settled by people who were dissatisfied somewhere else. It was colorful and new because it followed after a long period of fairly strong, rigid conformity. And all of a sudden, everybody was questioning everything.
I was an electrical engineer at IBM, and from there I went into sales at IBM. From there I went into management. So I did many, many things at this big company. Which was quite wonderful. At the time, my life was very successful. Good education, had good health, good job, living in Silicon Valley, beautiful, beautiful, lovely wife, nice home. But there was something else, there was something more.
I would go up to San Francisco and especially to Berkeley for my social life, and it was great. I mean, the boomers were the most secure generation probably in history. Their families had really worked very hard to provide security, and so boomers felt secure. Once you have security, it's safe to experiment, to try new things, to go new places. To think new thoughts. And many of them looked back at their families and said, whatever happens, I don't want to be like that.
Those young people had been brought up during the 1950s with a lot of material things. It was fun, but wasn't real. It was superficial, just like I felt. There's something more than this nice life.
So that was going on, much of it driven by the anti-war movement, by the fact that the males had a good chance of being dragged off to Vietnam to become cannon fodder.
$60,000 of those young men died, and 150,000 of them came back wounded. So my generation was decimated. The traditional males were gone. They had enlisted like their fathers had wanted them to do, and the non-traditional males were the artists, the musicians, the wild thinkers. So a generation kind of formed out of that, and it actually created so much music, the protest.
On the American West Coast, the University of Berkeley becomes one of the centers of protest against the war in Vietnam. University administration wants to ban the demonstrations.
This assemblage has developed to such a point that the purpose and work of the university have been materially impaired.
But the students won't let anyone shut them up. With the free speech movement, they fight for freedom of expression on the campus. Folk singer Bob Dylan describes the young generation's way of life. In 1964, he writes a song that becomes the anthem of the counterculture. The times, they are a-changin'. The times, they actually do change.
When I came to Berkeley, I was interested in participating in not only Bohemian society. I understood the beatniks in San Francisco, but also the activities against political repression. So I was politically active in a sense of protest.
You could not say that hippies launched the computer revolution. Some hippies were involved, some extremely buttoned-down people were involved. But it was a scene where you were especially valued by what you could come up with, and much less about all this incidental stuff like what you happened to be wearing at the time, or, you know, what music you liked or whatever. If you were good at whatever technical thing you were good at, you had respect for your actual skills and accomplishments, and not for all this side nonsense.
I keep thinking of what to design and build that can be useful. And around 1966, I started to figure out how can I build portable amplifiers, bullhorns, as we call them. I also built in the means of networking these things together with audio. So the idea was that the crowd could talk back to somebody else who was trying to talk to them. That was the beginning of my ideas of multilateral communication.
Just as today the public doesn't trust big media, big corporate media, then they had no other options. All you had was 3 television networks. You had big newspapers owned by big conglomerates. So the hippies and maybe the public didn't trust that, but they didn't have any other options.
Communication at eye level, where anyone is allowed to say something, an outrageous concept. The liberal ideas of the students are, however, not politically powerful. In 1966, Ronald Reagan becomes governor of California, a conservative hardliner who had demanded a firmer stance against the protesters in his election campaign. But the young generation remains in a state of upheaval.
Some of my friends were experimenting with communal living, and we're talking about living in the country, going back to the land, growing your own food, things like that. And I was a city boy. I grew up in the Bronx, and it was just fascinating to me to get involved in these outdoor activities and constructing our own shelters.
You know, there were lots of threads that were happening at the same time. It was not a monoculture. It was not a unified world. And so there was a part of the counterculture that rejected technology, and then there was the part of the counterculture that I think Stuart Brand represented very well, this notion that you had to appropriate the tools, and this was what personal computing was about. You had to appropriate the tools for your own culture. So Buckminster Fuller was happening at the same time that there was a very powerful back to the land movement happening.
Buckminster Fuller was one of the icons of the hippie movement because he was an out-of-the-box thinker. Even though he was an old man by the time the hippie ethos came, the hippies built his geodesic domes. They grooved on his ideas of new forms of community, being able to put a dome over a city and save energy, or to build a new way of living. And Bucky was kind of a hippie before his time.
It's very pleasant to be warmly greeted.
Buckminster Fuller. His ideas were far ahead of the nation's technology. Buckminster Fuller has lived to see a skeptical world come to believe in him, and his idea that man was born to succeed.
Fuller pointed out that the future of humanity had to be utopia or oblivion. And a lot of people understood that also, I did, and they were ready for the technology that meant a lot.
A lot of engineers worked for bigger mainframe-style companies, but those same engineers dreamed of having their own computer at home.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
The 60s end with a technological triumph. On July 21st, 1969, Neil Armstrong is the first man to walk on the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Suddenly, everything is possible. Technical enthusiasm and the desire to move boundaries. One who would later change the computer world cannot be pigeonholed. Neither hippie nor hobbyist, an individualist.
Steve Jobs was at the very end of the counterculture. I mean, he was a half a decade sort of behind the sort of peak. But Jobs, he was very influenced by Dylan and Joan Baez, and all of that stuff was sort of part of his worldview. And he was that mix of business and this view that computers could be this empowering tool.
Steve and I became friends in our first month of college at Reed College because we were both interested in the Be Here Now book, which was about psychedelics and spirituality. Actually, I'm the world expert on all the books that Steve and I read that made us want to go to India. My friendship with him was about reading these books and going to the Hare Krishna temple on Sunday nights and taking psychedelics on the weekends and that kind of thing.
He came to the small Zen group that we had years ago. He had just returned from India, had dropped out of college, and was still searching. So he only did it for a short time, until he found his real passion.
The funny thing about Steve was he never, ever talked about technology, really at all. Even though he had already been selling blue boxes.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, they had built blue boxes in high school, which were boxes that you could connect to the telephone system and dial calls nationally and internationally toll-free. Definitely illegal, but oh yes, this is fun.
Here's how it worked. In those days, the call billing information went through the same phone line as the phone call. So when you dial a number, you get a phone call, and then the next thing that happens is it's going to start billing for the duration of the call. But if you blow the tone 2600, the central office thinks you've hung up. So it turns off the billing, but if you haven't actually hung up, now you get a free call. That was the whole secret. And Steve Jobs and Woz immediately built a prototype, and Steve Jobs said, well, let's sell these. And that was how their partnership started. If it wasn't for the blue boxes, there may well have never been an Apple. Computers would have happened, but his particular partnership with Steve Jobs first started with the blue boxes. And because that was a successful project for them.
Meanwhile, some former hippies are roughing up the academic system in Silicon Valley. They form a free, self-governing university. No rigid curriculum, no hierarchies. Technology and alternative lifestyles are no contradiction to them.
I heard about this free university, the Free University of Palo Alto, which was having all of these wild courses. And I looked into it and said, okay, I'll go over and take a look.
And while I was there, we grew it up to 3,000 people who were members of the Free University. So to be a member was, I think, $10.
Anybody could teach anything. There was a course on psychedelics. I started a course called To Be Gentle, having come out of Texas where there is no such thing as being gentle. That's not manly.
And that was, in a way, the antecedent of today's internet, where you can read any content you want, but you can also create any content you want, put it up there. The Free University made all that possible. I think it opened our eyes to what could happen if people both consumed and contributed.
You are never too young to teach, nor too old to learn. The most natural state of human beings is endless curiosity.
The first class that I led was computer related. It was called How to End the IBM Monopoly, about how IBM gained control of enterprise computing, which was pretty much all the computing there was at that time. They didn't care about ease of use. And so I thought we should get people together and come up with a strategy for dethroning IBM.
I think at the time, IBM was seen kind of like Microsoft is seen now, or like Microsoft was seen before Apple got quite as strong as it is now.
IBM completely dominated the world of technology. I think it was the CEO of IBM was quoted as saying that they estimated that there was a market for 6 computers in the United States, talking about big mainframes.
This is what computers looked like in the 1960s and 1970s. The size of them was intimidating. And there were some manufacturers who liked that, felt the computer should loom over the user and minimize them.
The computer was this great big thing in a room and people wore white coats. So it was almost like a priesthood at a temple. So the mainframe was there. It was, sometimes you could see it behind glass, but it was a priesthood of mostly men that were operating this thing and caring and feeding it. It wasn't something that was in your hand. It was something very, very distant and very powerful.
I had friends in college. They would sneak down into the basement, into the computer lab, to try to get time on this giant computer. And I went to see them when this computer filled a room, and they had punch cards, and they would do something with them and feed them into the computer, and out would come the answer, whatever that answer was. And they were completely enthralled with this. But I felt that it had nothing to do with me, because it was an enormous, monolithic, opaque machine. And I couldn't understand it. I couldn't have a relationship with it. It dwarfed me.
It was seen as a tool of control, of societal control, and a tool of concentration of power. If you couldn't afford this machine, you couldn't do what you could do if you could. The IBM way of doing things was very much a creature of East Coast culture. It was an old company and very conservative in their social concepts. When you joined the company, they would actually lift up your pants leg and see if your socks went up to your knee. That was very important to them. You had to wear a black suit and a blue tie, and the salespeople were taught company songs out of a company songbook.
Ever onward, that's the spirit that has brought us fame. We're big, but bigger we will be. We can live, we'll all can see that to serve humanity has been our aim. Our colors now are known in every tone. Our reputation sparkles like a gem. We want our way through and new. Feels we sure to conquer to the ever onward IBM.
Those of us that were in the computer industry, young programmers, resented what IBM was doing to what we realized was a tremendously creative medium that should be under everybody's control, not just one gigantic company that had all the business. The biggest gripe I had about computers is that they had to be shared.
I was in search of machines that would help people form and maintain community. The agora, the plaza, the marketplace, and this agora has now been transformed into the mass media. So we come to the question of what do you need to do? I mean, as an engineer, I need to find my specifications somewhere. So we had, at the time, large computers to work with, and in fact, I wound up working with one such large computer. And I knew that we had to be able to do a kind of bulletin board.
3 decades before a company called Facebook goes online, a group of young computer freaks around Lee Felsenstein invented a small, local computer network in Berkeley. PCs are not yet available. The few public terminals are connected to a large mainframe computer.
This is a community memory terminal. Now, that was the first electronic public access social media. We wanted to set up a new information channel that was not controlled in the ways in which newspapers, broadcast media, and so forth were controlled. The direct intention of it was to provide a tool whereby people could create neighborhood and local information exchange centers. We had all kinds of interchanges. We had people who would type up typewriter graphics just to put it up there and so people could get it back by using the keyword they used. And we had a poet. He would enter some little lines of poetry and said, for more poetry, call the following number and talk to John.
Lee was one of the first to see that you could use personal computers as tools for both political and counterculture movements. And he had a very well-developed idea about the computer as a political tool. And he grew up in a socialist, communist family, and so he had these political values. He came to Berkeley. He was immediately in the student movement, but he also had this engineering background, and so he sort of blended that perspective. And he saw the computer not as a control tool, but as a liberation tool. Early on, very, very, very early on.
The first terminal was opened August 8th, 1973. Note, 1973 was before personal computers. I was afraid when we first set it up in Berkeley at a record store, very much a counterculture place, that they would be outraged. How dare you bring a computer into our wonderful little world we're creating? But that was not the case. Everyone looked at it and said, oh, can I use it?
Well, I fell in love with computers when I was in high school. I was lucky, even though it's pretty rare back in the late 60s. I was lucky to have a high school that had a terminal that was connected to a big computer far away. And I just took to it naturally, like a fish to water. I loved it. I loved being able to have an idea and then realize that idea by writing a program. Well, I knew I wanted my own computer. It just wasn't possible to have one.
There was a group of mostly young men in the Bay Area in the mid-70s who had this visceral hunger to get access to their own computer.
They wanted their own computer.
They weren't even sure what they were going to do with it when they got it, but they wanted to get it to explore.
And see what they could make it do.
They thought of these things as fantasy amplifiers.
Ted Nelson in 1974 published a book called Computer Lib. That was really the first articulation I saw of computers as a tool for the ordinary man and a counterbalance to sort of Big Brother. So it was an incredibly exciting concept that ordinary people could have their own computers as a counterbalance to the banks and government. And that really resonated with me.
And then the breakthrough. A small company, which until now had only made pocket calculators, rather randomly brings a kit on the market, which would go down in history as the first personal computer.
And here it is, the personal computer of nerds' dreams, the Altair 8800, which was announced on the cover of Popular Electronics magazine in January 1975. And it mobilized nerds everywhere. What you can do with this is enter ones and zeros into the computer with these front switches. And then you can run your program. But what does the program do? It just runs these blinking lights. But for nerds in the mid-70s in Silicon Valley and everywhere else, this was like an explosion of glee that they could do this at home, and it was a real computer. It wasn't just a calculator that added numbers. It was a real computer.
It was revolutionary, and it was considered ridiculous by many people who couldn't understand the potential.
The orders were far beyond the capacity of the company, and people had to wait for their kits to arrive. And so at least one person drove to the company, which was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, quite literally in the middle of nowhere. They drove in a recreational vehicle and they camped in the parking lot, waiting for their computer. And when they got the computer, it was a kit, it was loose parts. They sat down inside the vehicle and assembled it, and they would have to go back and get help.
Now, in the mid-70s, hippie and protest movements have run out of steam. But the desire to change the world, not to be bossed around by anonymous, large corporations, that lives on. Not with flowers in the hair, but with the soldering iron.
Behind this is the marvel of the ultra-miniature integrated circuit and the microprocessor chip. This chip is a complete digital computer circuit, the equal of large computers of the past. It costs only $12 and lets amateurs make computers do what computers never dreamed of doing before.
"30 people met in a garage on a rainy night in March and looked at this computer.
People got together, and it was entirely to sort of share the knowledge about hobbyist computers.
And somebody had decided, hey, let's start a computer club locally of nerds, of people who are interested in these microcomputers that you can get at a consumer price. The Homebrew Computer Club started in that dirt-floored garage when I went, but it quickly expanded to where it couldn't meet in that garage anymore. And so they went to Stanford and found a lecture hall and met there. And it was run as a benevolent dictatorship. One person said, okay, I'm willing to run the meetings. I'll be the interlocutor. That was Lee Felsenstein.
Now, I was one of those people, and I had my experience with community memory. So I knew that what you needed to do was to get the secondary information, that is to say, contact information. Who are these other people? What do they want to do? Who has what skill, what resources? It's just like the social media.
So one person would stand up and say, hey, I've got this problem with this particular program. Can anybody help me? Hey, I've heard that Intel is going to produce a new computer chip, microcomputer chip. Okay, yeah, what? Tell us a little about it.
Before money came into the picture, pretty much it was open sharing and giving. It was a thing that gradually empowered people. As a result of the excitement, they created something that was power to an individual. So the hippie ethos of the importance of the individual and the individual spirit and creativity rather than organizational man flowed right into the homebrew computer movement. And so they love to take of what they created in their bedroom to the homebrew club meeting and share it with their friends. At a homebrew club, a guy named Steve Dompier came with an Altair that they had programmed. They had switched in a program. Because they discovered that if they put an AM radio on the top and they ran this special program, the interference coming out of the machine would create tones on the radio.
He realized, I can make music with this. 30 hours later, he had a program that played music. He had to enter the program by hand on switches and lights, about 50 instructions. He entered The Fool on the Hill by the Beatles, and they said, wait. Had the radio there and turned it on, and it started playing da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Very poorly, but still it was identifiable.
Standing ovation ensued at the Homebrew meeting with Lee Felsenstein waving his stick and declaring that the Altair actually did something for the first time.
And this amazed everybody. How had he gotten the music out of the computer, for instance? Even Bill Gates couldn't figure that one out.
This young man, college dropout and computer freak, would become the richest entrepreneur in the world. Bill Gates laid the foundation of his empire early, when most other nerds didn't even think about earning money.
Bill grew up in Seattle. He didn't grow up in the Bay Area. He went to Harvard. He was fascinated by computers, and he was really quite entrepreneurial. I mean, in that sense, Bill really had a business sense right from the beginning. He was very early to understand the power of computing, personal computing, and that you could put a computer in every home. He had that vision very early, but it was not a political vision. It wasn't a cultural vision. It was a technical vision.
When the microcomputer issue came out, Bill Gates and Paul Allen were already friends. And Bill Gates runs to his friend and shows him this. He goes, "Oh my God, we got to get on this right away."
He went to MIT's Altair and said, "Hey, you got the MIT's Altair computer, but you don't have any software. I can give you a copy of BASIC, the basic computer language, as software, which will greatly enhance your product." The MIT's company said, "Cool, we'll sell it at, I think, $350 a pop." Some poor hobbyist in each area paid $350 for a copy of MIT's BASIC. And then suddenly there were multitudes of copies of these in the same area.
So we exchanged that BASIC. Somebody made up, I don't know, 20 copies and brought it back to the next meeting. Anybody who wanted one could take one.
Bill Gates noticed that people were not paying for his BASIC, which was basically a paper tape with holes punched in it, and it cost almost as much as the Altair computer, that people were just simply putting it into a paper tape reader and punching out another copy and giving them out.
Bill got very upset with this. By then, he and Paul had created Microsoft, and he wrote this really irate letter saying, "You hobbyists are stealing our life's blood. You're all a bunch of thieves and burglars.
How can we have good software and have a software industry if you guys are stealing software? You have to stop."
The culture of the Homebrew Computer Club right from the beginning was that you shared software, and software was this thing that amplified the machine. It made it work, and so of course you would share it. And you have to remember, there was no software industry at that point.
I think this has been one of the conundrums in the early computing industry. It really is founded by renegades who liked to think of themselves as renegades. But the problem is renegades eventually have to make money too and want to be compensated for the work that they perform and the innovations they create. So there's always been this difficulty about, do we copy protect things? Do we put traces on things? How do we monetize our creations? And I think Bill is one of the first people who went on record saying, no, we need to be paid for this work. This work has value and we need to pay for it.
They got Gates' letter, and there was a fairly caustic reaction from the community. They just didn't agree with him.
Yes, it was probably theft.
Well, the early computer guys, it wasn't about money at all. It was, gosh, it was about the personal human connection, and they saw beauty, a real beauty in computer code. It was like a romance, a love for coding, and a love for communicating and then using these tools and the very primitive early games, you know, little beep, beep, beep.
Wow. Oh. One more point. Yay!
We had this joystick that we used for games. That is a bicycle grip. After seeing Star Wars, my roommate, he actually wrote a program where you gunned down, the oncoming fighters using the, guiding with the joystick and firing with the button. It's actually just a pipe. So the underlying stick was really short, and so there's like a piece of wood on that and a pipe jammed on that, and then a bicycle grip on that, and then the button put in the end. So that was our game playing tool.
The technical gadgets slowly become real as the first companies are founded. Apple at this time, still with its playful apple tree logo, is one of the early garage startups.
I stayed in touch with Steve, and 1975, he went up to this farm in Oregon and fasted on apples. So we were living in the apple orchard. That's where the name Apple came from. And then the next year, Steve Wozniak created his computer prototype of the Apple I, and was demoing it Homebrew. And this was the first time that the Apple I was on display to the public. And that's me trying to look very serious and hoping that no one asks me any questions, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know how the computer worked. Steve Jobs knew how but at the show, it was mostly me standing at the booth while Steve and Woz went around to look at everybody else's stuff, right?
Oh, I knew both Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, Jobs and Woz, through the Computer Club. Both of them were nerds. Jobs was sort of a visionary and a fantasizer. Woz was a doer. And they were friends, high school buddies and continuing friends after high school. Woz said, look, the Altair's nice, but I want a computer that works the way I want it to work. And Jobs said, sure, cool. So Woz did all of the hardware and all of the software design. Maybe Steve helped a little bit here and there, but he was not the primary producer of what came to be the Apple I.
I've always thought that that's the fundamental chemistry that is at the heart of Silicon Valley. A hacker who is interested in sort of pursuing this technology in its own right, and a guy who sort of understands the business. And you put those together in the right way and you get companies like Apple.
And that's how Woz and Jobs got started. Jobs was the entrepreneur, and he was the visionary who could see, hey, this could go farther.
Jim Warren had been a bit of a Dionysian personality, and somebody who was very good at absorbing gossip and transmitting gossip. That he did at the meetings. If you look at the pictures we took at the Homebrew Computer Club. At one point, he is sitting in the back and everyone is turned to look at him. And so he then came up with the idea of holding a fair.
My idea of a computer fair was an expanded version of the Homebrew Computer Club, people talking about what they were doing, and if some people wanted to set up card tables outside and show off their products, that's fine.
Jim Warren, who was a member of the Homebrew Club and was sort of around locally on the Mid-Peninsula, realized that there was this need for a place for everybody to get together at a scale because there were all these businesses and products. And he set one up at a big auditorium downtown San Francisco, and it attracted huge crowds.
The personal computer is growing up and finally taken seriously. Vendors from all over the world travel to the San Francisco Computer Fair to see what started in Silicon Valley garages. The small gray boxes are not really personal yet. This will radically change only a few years later. And IBM, the big rival from the East Coast, is surprisingly entering the PC business before the World Wide Web changes our lives. The Silicon Valley revolution, it has just begun.
We went and checked it out and said, oh yeah, this is just perfect. Civic Auditorium, big auditorium for exhibits, a lot of meeting halls. Yeah, how much? Oh, $5,000 a day for each show day or something like that. I mean, thousands of dollars. Okay, thanks. We'll go and figure it out. God, is there any way we could afford to do this? And I started scribbling. Well, let's see. Here in Silicon Valley, we should be able to get at least 5,000 people. Hey, we could really rip them off and charge $7 or maybe even $8 or $9 or $10. And we should be able to have 150 exhibit spaces, maybe even 200. And we could charge them more. We could charge them $300 or $400. That number of exhibitors, estimated exhibitors, that number of dollars, multiply, add it up. And I looked up and said, wow, hell, we might even make a little money off of it. What a deal. And that's how the Computer Fair was born.
That was incredibly exciting to me. It was kind of a gathering of the clans, all the nerdy people who were interested in computers. It was kind of like Woodstock or something like that.
The Computer Fair drew people from out of town, out of state. So it was really a carnival atmosphere and extremely productive, I would say. In a way, it's one of the events you get in an agora.
The hobbyists were exhilarated, and it validated them as a community. It said, we are real, the personal computer is a real thing, and it's going to be the future. The world was coming to what they had created.
And that happened to be where the Apple II was formally introduced. And I thought it was just sensational, and fell in love with it right away.
And this machine was a runaway. It was a breakout machine. What made the Apple II different from what came before is it wasn't a bare, naked piece of technology that only a nerd would love. It doesn't look like something that you'll have to get a screwdriver to open it up and fix it and make it work. So Steve Jobs, being the marketing genius that he was, he went to a guy to get money, $100,000, to make this beautiful case that you see here, because he knew that the home buyer wouldn't put an ugly steel box on their kitchen counter.
You know, people forget what Steve's big invention was. Steve Jobs came up with the notion that people, everyday people, could use computers. When I first met him in '79, I went to his house and we sat on the floor, and he wasn't very good at making decisions. But we did have some funny times. We went shopping a lot, tried to buy a couch, no luck. It was difficult for him to pick a couch because he wanted the perfect couch, and he was willing to sit on the floor until he got it. And I used to think, that's ridiculous. And then I realized there's a certain majesty to that. It can be overdone, and he did overdo it. But there's a certain grandiosity there, isn't there?
I think the Japanese aesthetic was very attractive to him. And so he came to the practice motivated by the Japanese art forms. But as far as the spiritual practice is concerned, he wasn't interested. I think Steve tried to make it part of the design philosophy. In those early days, he made some comment. Look at the IBM personal computer. It's just this box. It's very boring. We could make it much more interesting and much more artistic, and he tried to do that with the Apple computers. And people would say, oh, look how beautiful.
Steve understood very well that there was a huge technology opportunity, and he wasn't like asking me to join him as a partner. He was paying me $3 an hour. That's what he paid me. It was minimum wage. So I was feeling poor. Most of the time, I was just sitting in the garage by myself, testing the circuit boards, and Steve was on the phone in the kitchen. That was what Apple was like. And when Steve would go out, then when the phone would ring, I would have to run into the kitchen and answer it. But I think at the time, Steve knew what was going on. Apple came to dominate many of the other companies for a variety of reasons. And then, of course, the spreadsheet came along.
I think the moment that the computer left the hobbyist realm was when our friends Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston could do their VisiCalc, could do their electronic spreadsheet. And when that came out and into 1979, accountants would look at that and they would see those numbers ripple and change. They could change one number and watch the whole thing.
Okay, Bob,
they would start crying.
He started shaking. He said, I spent all week doing that and you did it in 15 minutes. My God.
Well, I think neither of us realized how big it was going to be at the beginning.
But from VisiCalc, we did not make much money off of VisiCalc. Those weren't the days when many people made a lot of money. The issue is, why didn't we patent VisiCalc? Well, it's so obvious. We would have been really rich. Yes, we would have. But in those days, computer programs couldn't be patented. Only machines could be patented. So this at least is working. Okay. 18 months later, the Supreme Court in the United States changed the law. They basically said, oh, just because it's mathematics and programming doesn't mean it's unpatentable. Software patents of some sort are now allowed. If we had come out with VisiCalc 18 months later, we would have patented, we would have had it in, and you'd be in our villa now with our, But this is version 2 of, look at, this is a really old version of it. It's 1981. It would have been wonderful to be rich, okay? To be able to give to charity, pay to eradicate malaria. I mean, this is incredible stuff. But here it is more than 35 years later, and you're flying over from overseas to interview me, okay? Those type of things are also something that money can't buy, and that is nice. So the question is, what do you expect to get out of life? Money can help you get that in many cases, but there are other things that you can also get, and it's really nice to have people come up to you because they recognize me from whatever and say thank you, especially accountants. They bless me. I mean, it's like, it's kind of cool. What did VisiCalc make possible? Being able to figure out the type of financial instruments that let people run closer to the edge and do really well. It made junk bonds possible. They now had a tool that let them experiment. That's the problem with any technology. It's a double-edged sword. When you're building tools, you want to make sure that it's useful for good, I hope, those of us that want to do that. But you realize that people will use them as they see fit. The fact that some of the things that made the 80s be the way they were, the tool of choice for some of the people would be the electronic spreadsheet.
Ironically, two idealists, the VisiCalc inventors, had written a program that makes the PC an important tool for financial gamblers. And the timing fits. In the 1980s, the social climate in the USA is changing.
One of the things that was going on is that for most of the 80s, it was the Reagan administration. And conventional thinking was more in fashion.
With all those across the land who share a community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom.
I would characterize the 80s as what happened when these ideas that emerged from a couple of laboratories and a group of hobbyists spread out for the entire society. So the 80s was about the growth of a huge industry. John Doerr, the venture capitalist, called it the largest legal accumulation of capital in history. And that's what happened during the 1980s, is that this new industry touched just every part of American society, from homes to schools to businesses.
It was go, 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 make America great again, we're the best, military, business being the priority. So everybody in the 80s sort of copied that. And so it was a gigantic, booming industry in the 80s. You still found the tie-dye engineer in the back that's coding the operating system, but it was all business people up front.
After I bought my Apple II, of course, as a programmer, I started writing programs for it, and I'd give away the programs at the club. That was very exciting because I sort of had an audience for my programs. I could write a program and other people could be excited about it. But I had a friend who kind of said, oh no, don't give that away. You could sell it and make tens of thousands of dollars. And I had no idea how to do something like that. But he said, oh, don't worry, you write the program, I'll find the market for it, we'll split the money. And so that sounded interesting enough. Unfortunately, the people who wanted to be rich were a little more numerous than the people who were doing it out of love.
So when Apple went public, 1980, there were 100 millionaires, and I literally knew all of them. But then I was never going to get a stock option, which was very difficult for me. It was difficult for me, having been the first employee working in the garage. I was very frustrated and depressed for quite a while. Apple Computer didn't really owe me anything, but everybody knew I was a good employee and working hard and motivated, and everybody liked me, and I was really helpful. So they just assumed that Steve would take care of me, and he had no such thought. I have a theory now. I think there was a woman involved. There was a woman that I would have, that Steve was dating, and then he definitely told me he was not interested. So I called her up. And nothing happened, but I did call her up. I went to visit her in Chicago. And then it occurred to me one day, just this year, I thought, wait a minute, who knows what she told Steve? She could have easily told him something that would make him really infuriated at me. Mysteries of human psychology. Hard to, I don't know, you could say he was a narcissist. So many factors in Steve's life. That's why there's so many books about him.
While Steve Jobs is working on the next Apple computer, a message from the East Coast shocks the pioneers in Silicon Valley. In the spring of 1981, IBM, the hated corporation with its anonymous large mainframe computers, is bringing their own personal computer to the market.
The industry didn't grow slowly, it grew spectacularly quickly. From 75, it took only 6 years for IBM to realize it needed to be in this industry, personal computer industry.
They realized, oh, something's happening here. We got to get in on this. This is now in business. In the spring of 1981, I remember watching the NBC News broadcast. And what the broadcast showed were these boxes coming off an assembly line with IBM on them. And I remember looking at that and thinking, oh my God, this is the beginning of personal computers as a big thing, because all those buyers in those big companies will say, if it has IBM on it, I'll buy it. This is the IBM personal computer, launched in April of 1981. It had been a secret project. Nobody knew about it. When it came out, it hit Silicon Valley like an earthquake. It shook Silicon Valley to its core because Big Blue was here. The largest computer company on the planet had entered the market formerly of hobbyists and little local companies. And everybody sensed that this was going to change their whole future. And this machine shaped the 80s.
There's a famous, the response to the IBM PC introduction from Apple. Apple took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal that said, "Welcome, IBM, seriously," or something, kind of thinking that, well, it validates personal computers. Apple had a better product, and IBM diving in would make corporations more interested in buying the computer. So Apple kind of initially saw it as not such a bad thing.
At the Homebrew Club, we began an examination. I was one of the two people up front doing that. When we finally opened up one of their computers at a meeting, we realized IBM is doing something completely different now. They're doing things our ways. They're using commercial off-the-shelf components, and they published their code in the manual right there for us to see. IBM saved themselves, really, by adopting our philosophy.
One part of the story was that IBM had put its stamp on it, but it had used the parts from other companies. So Bill Gates, being the incredible business strategy guy that he is, jumped on the opportunity to get his operating system onto this computer, but it wasn't even his operating system. It was something written by Tim Patterson.
Bill Gates went to him and said, hey, we'd like to buy this to become a Microsoft product. Not saying anything at all about IBM, of course.
And the thing is, knowing it was IBM didn't mean much. I had no idea that it was going to turn out to be a success. I didn't understand the marketing forces that IBM had to turn it into something like they did. I did my job. I got paid for it. It doesn't bother me that I'm not well known. I am very proud of the accomplishment of having written a program that became, long after I wrote it, the most widely used computer program in the world for at least a decade. So that's, yeah, I'm proud of that. I don't begrudge that Microsoft is the one to make all the money on it, because they're the ones who got it there.
Bill Gates was a canny businessman because he basically said to IBM, I've got you over a barrel. You don't have an operating system. I have an operating system. But you must agree in my contract that you don't have exclusive rights to my DOS. I can sell it to other people. And that little clause in the contract by a very smart Bill Gates led to him becoming the richest man in the world.
You know, Bill is a force of nature from a personality perspective. I think he understood how to work in the big leagues from the very beginning. And so the IBM deal, I mean, I think in many ways it put Microsoft on the map. Sometimes whole industries turn on one meeting taking place or not taking place, and that was a seminal moment for Microsoft.
I think IBM accepted the deal to license rather than purchase the operating system from Bill Gates because they didn't understand what was happening. They did not understand the force that was going on. They did not realize that consumer computing would come to dominate business computing. But Gates had this very firm belief that there was going to be a personal computer in every household.
Microsoft becomes a global software giant thanks to its MS-DOS. Bill Gates establishes his company in Seattle. But Silicon Valley remains the leading center for innovation. Even traditional companies, such as the copier manufacturer Xerox, opens a computer research department here. A new corporate culture is emerging.
The conference rooms had beanbags like this. People could sit and relax in the beanbag and listen to somebody speak.
Silicon Valley was the place where so many people wanted to be at the time. And the whole concept of living without an oppressive organizational structure over you was very attractive. Xerox Corporation established their research center here, their Palo Alto Research Center, and of course that really developed the personal computer as it turned out.
The computer culture that grew up at Xerox PARC was a peculiarly West Coast culture. That kind of research style, which is now typical of Silicon Valley, started at Xerox PARC.
Every day was an adventure. I lived in biking distance of here, and whatever idea I had, I could pursue. When I came back from my experiments with social, communal living in the country, I wanted to do something different. I had a vision of things being simple to use, that anybody could use. I realized that computers were much more complicated than necessary. You should get simplicity. And I thought you should only have to spend a few minutes to learn to use the computer system. The Alto was our vision of what the future of computing was going to be, was reflected as well as we possibly could technically in the Alto.
Larry Tesler and his colleagues are developing a computer that is far ahead of its time. The first PC with a mouse, the first PC with a graphical interface. But as usual, others are making the big money. Apple founder Steve Jobs is, to put it diplomatically, inspired by the Alto computer.
And here we have the Alto from Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. And this was the machine that birthed everything. This was the machine that people first saw the mouse on, running windows and icons on the screen, making documents, composing music, and running games, all in the way we do it today. So people would come in and out of the research lab, see this, and one of those guys that came to Xerox PARC to see the Alto was Steve Jobs.
I was one of about 4 people who gave demos to Steve Jobs. When it was my turn to demo, he couldn't hold it in. He was exploding.
You could go click on that and select it and open a document, and then you could go type something, and that was completely revolutionary from the world of the Apple II.
He said things like, I don't understand. You're sitting on a gold mine. Why isn't this in the market? Why aren't you selling these? And we tried to explain that this was economically not feasible right now as a product. It was research for the future.
He could not believe that they weren't commercializing it. You know, because that was Steve's personality. It's like, oh my God, great technology, let's sell it. That's what he did with the Blue Box, and that's what he did with the Apple I and the Apple II.
He realized that was the machine that was going to change the world, but it wasn't going to be made by Xerox. His idea was, we can do it better. We can package what the Alto has in the Macintosh, and we can sell it to everybody.
The Macintosh was not bigger than everything else. The screen wasn't bigger. It wasn't as big as the Alto. It was, however, the defining product for a new generation of personal computers.
This was a tremendous blast for the scene. People who were used to sitting in front of machines, typing in a command to list files and doing this and that and seeing text, suddenly we're seeing pictures. When you wrote just a simple letter to your mom, it looked the same way on the screen as it would print out.
It was literally a life-changing experience. The idea that you could commit these words into a medium and then have the fluidity to move them around, get rid of things, add things, change things, do multiple drafts, it was literally life-changing. Like, I get excited even talking about it now. And so, for me, the idea that a personal computer could bring that to everyone was terribly, terribly exciting.
The introduction, of course, was a cultural dividing point. That's where, with the famous Ridley Scott commercial.
The theme of that commercial was that IBM was a bureaucratic company with legions of droids.
They presented IBM as Big Brother.
Mindless zombies sitting there in their chairs absorbing the speech from Big Brother, and it's all very rigid and very conformist and very boring.
And suddenly this woman, a cute woman in shorts and a stretch shirt, comes in wielding a hammer and throws it up and destroys the screen of the boss who was telling everybody what to do.
So Apple was the force of liberation. IBM was the force of oppression.
It was an astounding thing, and it was a beautiful piece of positioning, masterful.
To underline the revolutionary image of his computer, Apple CEO Steve Jobs uses an icon of counterculture.
Steve Jobs began the Macintosh introduction. The very first thing was he recited the second verse of The Times They Are A-Changing. Come writers and critics who prophesize with your pen and keep your eyes wide. The chance won't come again, but don't speak too soon because the wheel's still in spin and there's no telling who that it's naming. For the loser now will be later to win. The times they are a-changing. It's the second verse of Times Are Changing, and it had to do with, I think the key line there was the loser now will be later to win, because Apple was having a bit of a hard time, as IBM was sort of taking over the industry.
The message was, IBM, that's old stuff. We've got something really radical new for you.
Breaking down boundaries that had kept you from being able to use this stuff usefully, even if you weren't a technical person.
It was a true sandbox for the mind, so the imagination could take flight.
And all of a sudden, there was this sense that a computer had been created for someone like me, by a company that was run by people like me, who not only understood who I was and what I might want to do with computers, but who respected that, who actually respected an artist, a writer, a musician, and who wanted to give me not just a tool, but a collaborator that I could use to realize my visions and share them with the larger world. That was a revolution.
The computer, as we know it today, is here. And the next revolution is already happening. On the threshold of the new decade, boundaries are falling. Ronald Reagan and the Soviet President Gorbachev end the Cold War. In 1989, the Berlin Wall is falling.
The 90s was this grand opening. It was the full promise of personal computing.
The small boxes from Silicon Valley are turned into a window to the world. The American military had long been working on a global computer network. But in 1990, the internet becomes mass compatible. An English computer scientist in Switzerland has the idea of designing networks in such a way that everyone can use them easily. The World Wide Web is created and changes our lives.
Suddenly the entire world was connected. The Soviet Union fell. So our former enemy was now connected on the same network, and everybody had PCs.
Everyone I know has been affected by the internet and the web, and it's just a tremendous, tremendous thing. Almost incomparable advance in human history to connect the world.
I'm friends with people in England. I'm friends with people in France. I wouldn't know them if I met them on the street, but we have conversations all the time. And yeah, you used to be able to do that by the US mail, but it was a lot slower.
Bucks became sort of a place to anoint your firm, where the money meets the entrepreneur. So back in the 90s, we saw certainly Netscape was pivotal. Hotmail was founded here, sold for $400 million back when that was a lot of money. Now if you sell it for $400 million, people go, oh, well, maybe next time you'll do better. And more contemporarily, PayPal was funded here. Tesla was founded here at Bucks. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of firms had their early meetings here. It just became a thing to do. And then it's just snowballs. And then all of a sudden, I get in the movie. Crazy, huh?
Some protagonists of the PC revolution find new jobs in the world of the internet. Others become observers. Even Bill Gates initially underestimates the internet. It is not until later that he develops a browser, which he aggressively brings onto the market with the help of Microsoft's near monopoly. It is a new generation of computer freaks that have leverage now. Two Stanford graduates, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, invent a search engine in 1998, Google. In the tradition of the early nerds from the Homebrew Computer Club, they give their company the motto, "Do not be evil."
Well, Google is interesting because here you have two students and they kind of looked at the state of search engines, Yahoo and things like this, and they said, this is such crap. You go to Yahoo, you put in a search term, and you have to wait all this time because this is still in the modem days. Most people just had modems. You have to wait, all this crap is painting, ads and stuff like that on screen before I get my results, and the results aren't very good. So let's make something elegant and simple. There's no ads. It just says Google. You put it in, and the search engine's really good, really fast performing, and bingo, they hit it. You know, permission to steal, but make better. And so their ethos at the time, again, it was a bit of a hippie ethos. Don't be evil.
I'm not sure that Google's "don't be evil" is as much a hippie thing as a hacker thing. There's white hat hackers and black hat hackers. And the white hat hackers are very much on "don't be evil." So I think Google's "don't be evil" had some countercultural origins because that was part of the air people breathed. But I wouldn't I wouldn't put a lot of weight on a direct connection.
I was in the garage when that company first started, and they really did want to be different. I mean, they had a set of values they wanted to adhere to. But as they became a company that threw off literally $1 billion in cash a week, if you can imagine such a thing. It really profoundly changed their view. And within the last year, they actually dropped the "don't be evil" as a slogan. They're one of the most powerful companies in the world.
It is a fantastic new world, and it is a brave new world. I can see a lot of dangers in it, and we're certainly seeing any number of those. I can see a lot of benefits from it.
And then 9/11 happened, and then basically the old guard, that old Cold War guard, came back. And so it's a challenge to keep an open society versus a fear-based closed society. And Edward Snowden is sort of the avatar for this, saying your rights have already been taken away. Rights that were guaranteed you have been taken away in terms of the surveillance of your communications. You have a right to demand them back.
George Orwell could never have imagined such a completely powerful surveillance tool that the internet has become. They watch every movement you make, every breath you take is recorded, which is sad, And people make this trade-off. I mean, that's the amazing thing is that, for free stuff, we'll give away all of our private information. That's the way it is.
Some stuff, there's some beer down there.
The private is increasingly becoming public. The business model of Mark Zuckerberg is based on this idea.
We didn't want cubicles, so we got IKEA kitchen tables instead.
In 2004, the 20-year-old psychology and computer science student founds a company called Facebook. Approximately 1.6 billion people will later use the social network. What began with the free speech movement in Berkeley and in the garages of the Silicon Valley is today a global network. Technological democratization and fantastic new opportunities abound. However,
right now we have this illusion that we have a tremendously free society and anybody can do anything. You could say one or two more 9/11s and we might have a very different kind of society. And then the stuff that we're posting might be used to control a society. So something that could seem banal in a liberal democracy, Facebook, could be terrifying in a dictatorship where behavior was more controlled. It's deeply ironic that what started as a very utopian and libertarian movement can now be a force for surveillance and control all over the world, which it is.
I can't say that I'm happy with the way things have gone technologically and even socially with social media. I find myself being entranced by Facebook, for instance. Always, what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next? I'm a spectator at a show. I'm not a participant. The entire purpose of our social media efforts was to get people to meet each other. Talking face-to-face has no current equivalent in electronic media. And we can see that because the way people behave behind the screen anonymously is quite different from the way anyone would behave in direct conversation and discussion.
Sometimes I go to dinner with my brother and his nieces and nephews, and they spend the entire time at dinner like this, and I'm trying to talk to them, and I think, but on the other hand, they're connecting with 16 of their friends at the same time and sharing their whole lives. So I'm not sure that it's doing them any harm. They may be growing new neuronal connections. I know for me, it's becoming increasingly important to remember to walk outside and let beauty, the actual beauty of the world, wash into me and take me over. Now, when I met Bruce, I was saying the same thing to Bruce. Look, both of us need to put our feet in the ground. We literally need to have a garden and have our hands in the dirt because we need contact with reality, with nature. This is critically important. And it was really then that we came here and started working in the garden.
They have shaped the computer revolution. Today, a new generation is writing engineering history.
Oh, happy memories. This was, this is like honest labor that was fun, and I didn't get wealthy doing this, but, and I'm, I don't know. These things are worth money someday, but that's not. I took them because they were in boxes in my office at Apple, and I guess they would have gone in a dumpster, right? I'll show you this t-shirt because it's funny. This was my birthday, and because of my story about not having a stock option from Apple, my friends made this t-shirt. On the front it says, I was building computers in the Apple garage. On the back it says, and all I got was this t-shirt, which is very funny.
I've been retired for quite a while, and I'm working here in my own workspace doing this thing, and I've recently decided I'd really like to join a group environment, work with people, have a task that's going to be, maybe turn into a product and be used by lots. And I've applied for some jobs, and I'm not, maybe they think I'm too old, but I'm not getting calls back. So I'm feeling a little underappreciated, I guess.
People have to remain in control of the technology they use. That's a fundamental principle that I've been applying. We have to gain direct experience with it because we cannot turn it over to artificial intelligences or companies in China. So I've been designing some equipment that will allow kids from 11 up to gain an understanding that is visual and tactile of bit operations of Boolean logic.
I find that the younger generation is really worried about survival. They're interested in getting a job. They don't have the luxury. And we had great luxury to sit around and dream, and I want to do that. I'm going to be the greatest singer in the whole world, and I'm going to be the greatest painter, and we shared those dreams with each other. But a lot of the younger generations don't respond when someone of my generation talks about a wild idea.
Back then, the establishment in the computer industry was represented by IBM. Today, the establishment is Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Oracle. They're the ones that have billions of customers. But it's true that what I helped to create is today's establishment. That's what I was trying to get rid of, an establishment.
Some idols of counterculture change sides.
I saw the commercial where Bob Dylan is being a key figure in an IBM commercial. I think he was just looking for big bucks, and they probably paid a lot of money to him. I find it really bizarre that in the 1980s, Steve Jobs has quoted Bob Dylan when he introduced the Macintosh, and now Bob Dylan is older, more wrinkled, and shilling for IBM. It's a disappointment.
I think that's still true. It's still very, very possible for someone in their bedroom or garage to write a program and start a company and make a real difference in the world. And so, of course, the big companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, aren't centers of rebellion anymore. They are the establishment. When you're big, you have lots of advantages, but you also have some disadvantages. If you have some business model making you rich, you sort of don't want to mess with it as much. And so to see the next thing to happen is easier if you're starting from scratch.
I think that the spirit of innovation is more alive now than ever.
I think there's still a lot left to those early ideals. Can I solve this biological problem? Can I solve this genetic problem? Can I solve this artificial intelligence problem? Wow, these are neat things. This is fun to work on. This is fulfilling. This is satisfying.
It is a big industry. I think last year there were $55 billion in venture invested in the United States. So when you just understand the magnitude of that amount of capital trying to disrupt and change things, it's really a remarkable thing. So on the one hand, I think the money is a great thing. On the other hand, I think that sometimes there's too much money in the system. And I think what people forget is the day you take someone else's money, you have made a commitment to return that money to them. So think very carefully about that money, because that money is a commitment and a partnership. It's easier to get divorced than it is to get rid of your venture capitalists.
There's probably an order of magnitude more startups today than there were in the 80s. And yeah, they fail at a great rate. And yeah, some of them are stupid, but some of them are going to completely changed the world, and we don't know which one is which. The important thing is to keep a climate where they can exist and prosper.
I think what the hippie to homebrew revolution did was permanently install the idea that you needed free-thinking people somewhere in your ranks to do something, and that they're highly valued, so they'll go to somebody else if you don't use them, but you need to have some of that. And they're not just weirdos, you know, so the weird is okay.
It's not that important what you wear or how you look. It's what's going on inside your head, not what's going on outside your head, that really matters here. And I think that is still true today. I mean, I still think if, you know, there is another joke about Silicon Valley is if you want to know who the most important person in the room is, it's the most poorly dressed person in the room.
West Coast revolution, starting with the music scene, the art scene, if you will, the drug scene in the 60s, but the opening of liberation movements for women, for people of color, the eco movement, those all fed into the personal computer revolution, which then powered them. So the revolution of small computers became a revolution for every human being on the planet holding a smartphone or being somehow connected. This West Coast revolution is the revolution for the next 500 years, and it started on these shores, and like a tide, it just rolled out again and again and again across the planet.